We're about a month and a half away from an election here in Louisiana.
And gubernatorial candidate Gary Landrieu is at the center of a controversy because of a racial slur he used on a New Orleans radio show.
When I was a kid, we learned about protecting ourselves and defending ourselves because we were called a lot of ugly names as children, you know.
Were you?
Yeah. They call me, oh, there's the lovers right there.
Hey!
He can't curse.
I'm sorry, I can't say that?
No.
Well,
Landrieu apparently made the comment while at AM station WGSO, and as you probably noticed, the host jumping in and telling him not to say that at the end.
for his part, the candidate doesn't seem to think there was anything wrong with what he said, and he just defended himself at a news conference about an hour ago. Danny Monteverdi was there, and Danny, what did he have to say?
Well, Karen, Gary Landrieu says tonight that he is being taken out of context. Now, Gary Landrieu is the cousin of Mitch Landrieu, and he says that while he was growing up, he was subjected to a lot of racial slurs. That's apparently because of actions Moon Landrieu took when he was mayor, desegregated City Hall, and made other opportunities for African Americans. Those were not always welcome actions. Gary Landrieu held what he called a press conference earlier today to address this issue. Here's what he had to say.
I did not call anyone a derogatory word. I do not condone the use of hate words. My experience as a child taught me all about racism. There is no room in our society for hate.
Now, after that, he made a comment that sounded like he was angry at The Advocate for first publishing this story. We expected a full press conference where we could ask questions to get clarity on that, but he didn't take any questions after he made that statement. He got into his car and drove off. And while he says he was just relaying what he dealt with as a child, a professor at Loyola University who teaches him African American studies says that answer just really isn't good enough, and it's not a good enough explanation either.
What I'm saying is that even if we take him at his word, you know, what he said, he was just trying to share this story, that one cannot be blind to the social and cultural and political context in which one is speaking, particularly when one is in the public eye.
Now, this is a story that first got legs after a website called Right Wing Watch published a clip of that interview on YouTube. We reached out to WGSO Radio to see if they had any comment. They declined to comment. We also spoke to Gary Landrieu earlier on the phone today before he held that brief availability. At that point, he said he didn't think he did anything wrong, and he said that he would, quote, get the publicity we get out of this. Reporting live, Danny Monteverdi, Eyewitness News.